This is Defenders TV Podcast, looking at The Punisher. Episode 9 is Flustercluck.
I hear a lot of people saying the blues, but I'm gonna tell you what the blues is. When you ain't got no money, you got the blues. When you ain't got no money.
Welcome back, fellow Defenders. This is episode 9 of The Punisher Season 2, where we are looking at Flustercluck. And this is Defenders TV Podcast, episode 215. I am one of your hosts, John.
And I'm your other host for this episode, Derek. Chris unfortunately can't join us. Had a bit of a flustercluck himself, so he couldn't be with us. This is going to get difficult. We're probably only going to say that word one more time because otherwise we're going to totally mess it up, aren't we?
Exactly, but I think just to remind all our listeners that we will not have a Flustercluck on this episode. We will be getting straight into our spoiler-filled review. But remember, first of all, get in contact with us if you have any thoughts on this season of The Punisher so far, or any particular episode. Please join us over on our Facebook group where you can leave messages over at our spoiler-filled discussion comments. Just head on over to facebook.com/groups/Defenders TV Podcast. And we have voicemails through our website at defenderstvpodcast.com. Just click on the right-hand side tab and leave 90 seconds of your thoughts about the Punisher Season 2. And of course, we have the traditional email. You can send any comments through to feedback@defenderstvpodcast.com. So we cannot wait to hear some of your thoughts, theories, and views on the Season 2 of Punisher.
Yeah, we've already got some feedback on the final episode and on the full season as a whole. So if you want to send in your feedback for the final episode, just mark it season spoilers, something like that, and we'll read it out in our final episode. And make sure you do subscribe to the podcast. Our main podcast feed is on Defenders TV Podcast over on any good or evil podcast catcher service. Check them out. Just search for Defenders TV Podcast or pop to our website at defenderstvpodcast.com. Obviously, over the rest of this year, we're going to be covering other things like Captain Marvel, the next Marvel movie, obviously Avengers Endgame is coming up later on in the year as well, and we'll be finishing out Punisher and also Jessica Jones. When we get a release date for that, we will let you know, and we'll be covering it on the main feed as well. So.
Yes, and like the two of us, if you cannot remember maybe what the other Marvel film is this year, the big one, it is, of course, Spider-Man.
Chris wouldn't have forgotten that, would he?
No.
We did.
We did.
Even though I'm loving Spider-Man, absolutely love it.
But I think we were cycling through, the Hulk, Guardians of the Galaxy, Doctor Strange, Thor, and of course, Spider-Man will be released basically through Sony, but obviously with Marvel as well, with that partnership. But enough of that. On with some of the episode details. Derek, what have we got here?
Yes, this episode was written by Steve Lightfoot, the showrunner of the show, and Ken Christensen. Ken Christensen already wrote an episode this season. He wrote Trouble the Water, which was an episode from earlier on this season. He also wrote an episode last season, he did Virtue of the Vicious in season 1 as well. But working with the showrunner himself, Steve Lightfoot.
Yeah, and Ken has been heavily involved in the writing department for The Punisher, both in season 1 and season 2. Season 1, he was a staff writer across all the episodes, and he has gone to be the story editor in this season. So really heavy involvement there.
Yes, and the director for this episode is Sally Richardson Whitfield. This is her first episode of The Punisher, but she was an American actress who starred on the TV show Eureka for most of its run. She's done loads of other stuff, like I Am Legend, the movie. She was in that movie. There's not much room for any other characters other than Will Smith in that, so she was one of the other actresses in that movie. She has steadily worked on either side of the camera over the years. She's been doing work in front of the camera and behind the camera for a number of other shows. She directed episodes of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and Luke Cage, so we have spoken about her before. And she's also done The Wonderful American Gods, did an episode of Black Lightning as well, and is working on the upcoming DC show Doom Patrol, which is on the DC Universe service as well.
Yeah, loads of stuff there from Sally Richardson Whitfield. Excellent stuff.
Yeah. John, do you want to tell us what they gave us with your synopsis for the episode?
Sure. As Billy Russo and Dr. Dumont consider their future, Billy and his veteran army go on a successful robbery and murder spree through the city. But this makes him easier to track, and Frank Castle learns of his warehouse hideout called Valhalla. Russo also breaks into Madani's apartment and confronts her on his forgotten memories, where she reveals that he killed Castle's family. Meanwhile, Anderson Schultz, Now in New York City with his son, David instructs the Pilgrim to place a $5 million bounty on Frank Castle and Amy to draw them out into the open. The large cash prize, assuming survival, inspires New York's worst to pursue the Punisher and Amy, but also reconnects the Pilgrim with his murky past. But as Frank seeks out Billy, a restless Amy leaves the caravan and seeks help from a fellow grifter that leaves her in serious danger.
Would you be tempted? $5 million to go after Frank Castle and Amy.
I wouldn't go near that. That is like being asked to swim the English Channel or something like that when it's infested with great white sharks. Not a
Piranhas
chance.
in the water, yes. No chance.
Not a chance.
But I can see why a lot of very bad people would be tempted. I was kind of expecting this episode, when I heard that earlier on, I was kind of expecting this episode was going to be like The Warriors. We've talked about this movie many, many times on our show, where you have multiple gangs coming out, all with different styles, trying to kill the Punisher over the course of his traversal across the city to get back to Amy. Just because of the amount of money you're talking about, it could have brought out loads of really interesting serial killers and snipers and people from all across the city. You know?
Well, I think that's it. I would probably hire a hitman with a IOU note of $1 million, and then he can do it for me.
And you get the other $4 million. I like.
And I can just stroke my white cat and go, the Punisher.
Right, let's get on to our bullet points for this episode, John. First bullet point is what should have happened in episode 4 of the show.
Yes.
The Schultzes in New York. Yes.
Yes, the Schultzes come to New York. Primarily Anderson Schultz comes to meet the Pilgrim. He's practicing his golf game. He's at the driving range to convince him to effectively put out a contract, a $5 million bounty onto the heads of both Frank Castle and Amy. But he wants him to reconnect with some of his former associates, former contacts in New York, which I really like this because you do begin to build up the sense of the Pilgrim. You know, we got in episode 2 or 3 him with the tattoos that have been removed. So we got a sense of his history here. And it's really nice to see him almost pull away from that. You know, he doesn't want to. He says, I'm not sure what will happen, how I will react to coming back into contact with his former associates. Yeah. And I like the fact that he kind of recoils from this suggestion. But ultimately, you know, I think Anderson Schultz does make the fair point. We've gone past it trying to keep it quiet at this stage because Frank Castle was in a huge shootout in the middle of the street with Billy Russo. So it really is one of those... let's just get on with this. Let's get other people to do our dirty work here. Yeah. But I like the fact that it is going to connect the Pilgrim, the Man in Black, to his old associates in New York. And of course, actually, we do get to actually hear the Pilgrim's real name, but we'll come back to that at a later bullet point when we discuss a little more his past.
Because there's other important stuff that happens in this episode with Schultz. Yeah, we also get the meeting of David and his father. We've only seen David for a second in a photograph where it was revealed that he's kissing another man. And that was supposed to be the big revelation. Our big complaint so far this season about this storyline is that we haven't seen the Schultz at all. We haven't learned much about Pilgrim. And my joke really about that, this moment should have happened in episode 4, is that this would have given all the impact, really, that you needed. It isn't showing off, really, that David is gay here. It's not showing off that he's doing anything other than following his father's wishes and that he doesn't get on with his father because his father's trying to push him into a political career rather than actually caring for him. All of these things would have been important before finding out what it was that possibly they could have been blackmailed for. And why Pilgrim is in the city of New York to kill people on behalf of the Schultzes.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's really good here is that there is the suggestion because, you know, later on we come back to Daddy Schultz practicing his golf game again, but with David there now. And, you know, he has a really bad shot and he blasphemes. He says, "Oh my God," you know, or "Oh God, oh damn." You get that really nice tense moment where David says, "What would the faithful say if they heard you swearing like that?" And he goes, "Well, you know, it's one of those things where there are some blasphemes that they can forgive, and then as he looks at his own son, there are others that they won't." It's a really interesting moment here because, again, you get the sense that, you know, David feels hemmed in by his dad. You know, he says, "You've always talked to me as though it is on the campaign trail, that this is about you trying to get me a wife. You know, it's more about party optics than it is about me, ultimately." So you have this really nice moment where you feel the isolation from his own family from David. You get the sense of the contradiction here of what the Schultz want to portray publicly as to the more complex idea of what their family actually is and what they're trying to hide. And even to the sense that I kind of felt that the Pilgrim doesn't know that David Schultz is gay either.
No, absolutely.
And it will be interesting to see if he finds out how his reaction will play out here. I think the other great thing is it has a really nice broader society discussion, which is, you know, David says to his dad, who's trying to get him to come back to their small little country hometown to connect with potential sponsors. I think he says, press the flesh with potential sponsors. And I mean, the interesting thing is David says, you know, the world has moved on, and you know, it's not going as shocking as it used to be, the fact that he is gay. And I like the idea that his dad says, well, you would be surprised. You know, things haven't moved on all that much either. I think there's a really interesting thing here about to what extent society or elements of society on topics that they consider to be controversial either are vocal about it or are that silent group that only show their cards at a certain time. And I think that feels as though that's what his father is saying to him, even though David, obviously living in New York, a very different kind of place to the family home where the Schultzes, Anderson and his wife, come from. It's these two worlds that collide in different ways, and it's really interesting, I think.
It is, absolutely. And again, just would have liked to seen it a little bit earlier, or would have liked to see some other stuff connected to it. Even if we had something like David going back to the town to do some of this pressing the flesh work, and then they have the conversation, you know?
Definitely.
If that had happened sometime earlier on in the season, that would have been great. Having it now is good, but it still feels like they haven't said a lot of things. David never once says he's gay, or he has a boyfriend, or he has a husband, or anything like that at all. All he says to his father is, "You're probably here to convince me to find a wife. Is that what you're here for?" kind of thing. And you're feeling at moments that Anderson is actually looking at his son going, "I need to get you out of this city. This city has done things to you. This city is causing you to be gay," almost. That kind of thing is in there, but it's not being said. It feels like he just needs to pull him out of the city. So there's two kind of contrasting pieces here. It feels like, you know, he possibly is caring for David, saying get him out of the city while Pilgrim does his work effectively, so there's no blame and there's no blowback on David while he's there, or it's get him out of the city that's corrupting my son. But David it feels like he ran away from his hometown to get here.
Definitely.
But it just feels, I don't know, there's a little bit of balancing that needed to be done for this whole piece about the Schultzes to matter more. And because it's coming at episode 9 now, it feels like, is it a little bit too late? It's definitely warranted and definitely needed. I love that little delusional moment in Anderson there, you know, where we have the whole conversation about blasphemy. He's absolutely right. You know, the whole community would not cast him out because he said Jesus Christ on the golf course. You know, they're not that bad. But then, of course, he goes, God gives you everything if you just work for him, and then makes a great golf shot and goes, see? As if God is controlling his golf shots.
Yeah, I mean, he says living proof that faith is rewarded. And I mean, he's delusional anyway, with regards to this, but also, as I say, having to keep that lie, or having to have that two-sided perspective about who his family is and what he wants to project into the community publicly, you know, is a delusional thing to do. It's not honest either. So definitely we really get a good sense of the Schultzes here. And I agree, this is great to have. It would have been good to have had it a little bit earlier, to be honest. But yeah, this is really good to have. Yes, but on to bullet point number 2, cabin fever. Amy and Curtis get the shakes. Yes, they are pent up in the caravan, in Frank's caravan. Just having to deal with one another, the small space, whilst Frank is out on the town, not partying, but trying to track down Billy Russo. And these two are, in this small caravan, getting slowly sort of cabin fever. Dare I say a little bit of the red mist, getting a bit angry at one another.
Yep.
And I really like the conversation that they have here. They really sort of, they're cooped up together, but they open up together about how their life has turned out. Curtis kind of really identifying that, Amy wasn't this kind of precious, sort of innocent girl even before she did meet Frank. Mm-hmm. And how, what would she have liked to have done, really? She talks about being effectively a scuba diver, really, but she can't swim.
But she's never actually seen the ocean.
And she's never seen the ocean. And then, Curtis suddenly has this sort of road to Damascus moment. This kind of light hits him as he realizes, why am I cooped up in this caravan? He's got his own apartment. He's allowed his new girlfriend to kind of slide on by because he's been, again, caught up with Frank and all this craziness that is playing out in Frank's life and Amy's life, and it's just pulled in like a tornado, Curtis. And, he realizes also that he's let down his veterans, that his veteran group are all kind of moving to work with Billy Russo, or a large portion of them, and that there are others there that needs his support, his guidance, and his help.
Yeah, I like the fact that Curtis goes back to this group, and it wasn't for the reason that I thought originally when I'd watched the episode. I thought it was exactly as you were saying, John, that he's going back because he doesn't want to let them down, which is what he says to Amy. But in fact, he's going to use his group. He's going to go back to these guys and go, well, Billy's obviously hiring veterans, and you know how much I hate Billy. This is the guy that shot me and beat me up. And he goes, any chance you guys could be on the lookout and find out who he is? We see at the end of the episode, one of the guys actually has made it to Russo's team's hideout. He's dressed up as the homeless guy just outside Russo's camp. So he's made it there. He's gone on the instructions of Curtis. Will this lead to more trouble for him or not? We don't know, but it's quite interesting that that's actually was Curtis's plan, was to get out and do this. But he's been left in charge of Amy. Amy's a young girl who's on her own, and he's been left in charge of taking care of her, because Frank always knew she was going to run. We saw that back in episode 1 and 2. This was a girl that he had to tie to a bed to make sure she didn't run away. And Frank needed somebody to look over her. We hear how angry Frank gets over the phone with Curtis when he comes back and finds out that Amy's gone. And that's partly because Frank's angry at himself, of course, for leaving her alone and not tying her down to the bed like he did last time, Yeah,
again, this was for me another little bit of empathy or understanding that just leaked from me with regards to Frank, where he was giving out to Curtis because Amy had left.
Yeah.
Curtis didn't know about the 5 million bounty, and you're kind of thinking, well, Frank, why didn't you phone them as soon as you knew that this was happening? Mm-hmm. That's when you needed to do it, to warn them in case anyone came to the caravan, let alone the fact that they may have walked outdoors or something like that and had been spotted. So for me, I just felt his reaction here was just slightly ungrateful. And I was kind of like, oh, okay, you really are just so horrific.
Well, let's quickly talk about that, because last episode what we were talking about was Frank going to the grave of his wife, Maria. And we were talking about that as shorthand for a way of saying that this is Frank resettling himself after going so violent that he pushed himself over the edge. None of us were right on that. I was listening back to the podcast and listening back to our discussion on this. None of us got the reason why he went to Maria's grave. What we find actually is that he wanted to have the conversation with ghost of his wife kind of thing, obviously, as we'd said. But it was actually that he was explaining he's always been this way. He's always been a brutally violent man. We saw that in season 1. We saw that moment when he was in the war with Billy at the time and went in and slaughtered all of the opponents in Kandahar. We saw those moments. But he's saying that his wife has accepted him for being that, and his family accepted them, and they gave him all of their love, and all that he brought on them was death. So he's saying, now that they're gone and there's no one there to give him love, he is the only person that can be in this position as the Punisher, So it's not out of character is what he's saying to us, the audience, to be as violent and brutal as he is. He's always been this brutal and violent, but he kind of was able to tone it down and shut it off when he had the love of his family around him.
I think the only theory that we possibly got right on this, and I don't mean to blow my own trumpet, but it was probably me saying, I would fear for his wife and his kids' safety if Frank was around, because this was kind of basically saying, well, he was this person and he was this person around his family. And we can see how other families, Micro's family, or indeed, his social family of Curtis, of picking up Amy and trying to protect her, how it works out for them. And if not this family, probably the Schultz's family. Who knows what may happen to David? And he has no kind of idea that this is going on, or even maybe Anderson's wife. She may not know what machinations her husband is doing. Is she fully in on it? So this is kind of, I think for me, I was really shocked because it was like, oh, so you're using your dead wife to kind of justify, because you've had this conversation, which in reality is a conversation with yourself, to justify the level of violence that you have. I mean, I do understand that the Punisher is a gruff character. He's difficult to connect with. Absolutely. And I loved that in season 1 with Micro. I thought it was really good. And I love how that plays with Curtis as well, both in last season and in this season. But there is something here where it just feels that it's too much for me that, again, he would have that conversation with Curtis and put it on Curtis, who ultimately does say, oh, yeah, I'm really sorry. But, he's been monitoring the airwaves on the CB radio with Amy. He's been looking after Amy. He helped to take down the sniper to protect. So he's helping Frank. And I just feel Frank, it's probably down to the fact that he knows he should have protected Amy or stayed with her, or he should have called before, and he's taking it out on Curtis ultimately. But I think when you couple it to that conversation by the graveside, which ultimately is, that's how I'm justifying how bad I am, is that apparently my dead wife is telling me that I've always been like this.
Right.
Which, no, you've just had that concoction yourself.
No, I think his wife did know, and we did see flashbacks to them saying that in season 1 that they didn't have a perfect relationship, and he was argumentative with her as well. It wasn't always lovey-dovey and then she was murdered. They did have that bit of complexity in their relationship, which I thought was quite interesting back in season 1. But yeah, let's just talk about the other bit that comes out of this. As you mentioned, Curtis and Amy were monitoring the radio for broadcasts from Billy's gang, and they relay that they found a group that's on a job because Curtis hears one of the kind of call signs that they used to use in the army, so he knows it's this group that are going out and attacking people in the city. But this, again, feels like an unusual thing for Frank to do. He walks in, violent and aggressive as he has been all season, and kills every single person without interrogating even one of them. That just felt like a weird one for me. I know that he's now more headshot than leg shot most of the time, but he was there to get information on where Billy was and just killed every single person, then kind of went, oh, shoot, why did I do that? That doesn't feel like the Frank that we had last season or earlier on in this season. Again, it feels like Frank is completely losing control of his abilities again. I think I've said this already earlier on in another episode, but this is just another bit of underlining saying Frank's not as good as he used to be, almost. He's great at killing people, send him straight for somebody that you want killed, but he's not as good as he was in the past at the investigation side.
No, definitely.
Which seems weird.
Yeah, it's... And maybe that's because Micro isn't there. There was a lot of that investigative stuff through, hacking into databases and stuff with Micro that maybe sent him down a particular way.
Yeah. And I do remember, Micro was telling him not to kill people a couple of times in last season when he was going after army guys, saying, they're just like you, Frank. You can't kill everybody you walk through. So, again, we have Frank out on his own here with nobody to tell him don't kill everybody there. So maybe, he's messing up a little bit now.
Yeah, possibly, because Amy's not there, and again, she was trying to keep him from killing everyone.
Mm-hmm. Curtis stopped him from strangling Amy and shooting her in the head and the floor.
Yeah, I mean, I like how it comes back to Jake here as well, because Curtis has, stopped Frank from basically killing Jake as well. Mm-hmm. And I do like that when Curtis connects back in with the veterans in his group, that they bring up Jake and it's like, did you see what they did to him?
Yeah.
And Curtis has to explain that. I think that's really good, that horrific kind of interrogation and brutalization of Jake, despite maybe, whether he was doing good or bad or whatever, has been called out, and to Curtis, you know, really, really nice, I think.
Yeah.
But ultimately, you know, whilst he's out tracking, he does find out about Valhalla and where Billy Russo's group is, where they're kind of partying. They're not really keeping things too much of a secret. But I think onto bullet point 3, speaking of Billy Russo, the monster inside Madani's apartment. This, for me, was absolutely the best thing about this episode for me. I absolutely loved Billy creeping into Madani's apartment and that confrontation between the two of them.
Oh, yeah.
Ultimately, both of these characters were so defiant. I love Madani really staring down Billy Russo, doing everything she can, effectively to get a spare weapon to kill him.
Yeah.
I loved how she was so defiant. You know, she tells it to him straight. You know, you went for status, power, and money, and you threw everyone that cared for you under the bus, which was Frank's family, and including Frank. And this is why you have this scarring. This is why he's after you. You know, there's no pussyfooting around here.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's straight to the brutal truth of Billy Russo.
I absolutely love the way she says this to Billy, because she's effectively saying to him, you want to know how you got those scars? You got them because Frank is punishing you. He is telling you that you needed to live the rest of your life with the ugliness that's on the inside that we found out about, that me and Frank found out about, with those marks on your face so you see the ugliness. I think Madani's effectively telling him, the only bad part about this is you lost your memory of what happened, so you can't feel the punishment that was given to you by Frank. You know, Billy completely twists that, as he will do all the time. We hear him kind of go, "Oh, but I'll still punish Frank for doing this to me." You know, it's very unusual that he's not taking this on board at all. He doesn't feel like he's in the wrong at all here.
Yeah, I mean, he still doesn't remember it,
Yeah.
and I think as well, it's the fact that it's coming from Madonna, and I love how he twists it back on her as well. I mean, this is really a power relationship, power play that he is trying to do here. And I think ultimately it does suggest an underlying badness that Madonna has consistently said that he may have lost his memory. He may be struggling to understand what's going on. But in this moment, you see that underlying badness, I think, where he tries to use his sexual prowess, his former good looks, where he turns to Madonna and says, "You must have really liked me, given how you are really attacking me here. Was it in this bedroom, in this bed? How did it go?" You know, he really plays at that, and you can see that twists at her, really, because she knows that it was that relationship that effectively unpicked everything, down to Stein's death, down to the whole thing that went down. Effectively, her getting a bullet in her head. Mm-hmm. You know, she was used and abused in effect. Yeah. And most of her flashbacks have been this notion of them, like in the shower, have been the dreams, the memories have been about him and her having intimate moments, and he uses that there and then, and I thought that was really, really interesting.
But remember, they have mixed those, of course, with Madani knowing that she's been shot and beaten by him as well, so she's gotten both of those mixed together, the sex moments and the violent moments that they had, which is really interesting. Like, and as I say, Billy going back to Dumont and being really aggressive and angry again about the fact that Frank has turned on him. He's saying to her, "I couldn't possibly have done that because I loved his family so much, so this must all be Frank." You know, he just doesn't realize how awful a human being he was. You know, he still doesn't get that into his head at all. And again, I'm very scared for Dumont here. You know, she seems to be kind of sticking on his side. You know, earlier on in the episode, we now know that she absolutely knows that Billy's going out stealing, because she's saying this eventually has to stop, and we can take all of this money that you're stealing and go on the run. Effectively, the two of us can go away. So she's really enabling him. She's absolutely becoming this partner in crime, almost the Bonnie and Clyde kind of idea. You know,
it really is. I mean, there's a lot of codependency going on between these two characters, and I mean, I found it really strange here then that not only do we have the monster inside Madani's apartment, but then Dumont invites Madani to her apartment.
Yeah.
Really interesting. And it seems to all stem from the fact that he talks about having gone to Madani's apartment to Dr. Dumont, or should I say Krista. We actually, I think, finally get her first name here.
Yeah.
And
I think we've heard of it. I just don't think for some reason we've written it down in any of our notes before.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I think, but it's just, it's like she suddenly becomes jealous, and that's why she asks Madani over. But then you have this really weird conversation about Billy Russo. She is trying to understand how Madani has coped with Billy Russo, and it's almost like so she can better understand her relationship with Billy Russo, or how she should behave around Billy Russo. She's still, there's a jealousy element here. It was really strange. I was not expecting this, simply because Madani and her didn't seem to be, shall we say, the best of professional colleagues.
Oh, no.
Back in the hospital. And I'm surprised that Madani took it up, and why she did. So, this seems a little unknown to me as to why this happened.
Yeah, I definitely have to hold this one over till the next episode, because it was just that one scene. The only thing that was coming out for me was the conversation that she had with Billy just beforehand. Billy kind of indicates to her that Madani probably knows where Frank is, because she has worked with him in the past and they have got that relationship. Frank was there at the carousel when he got the scars. He knows that now, so it's very likely that they've stayed in touch. So I'm wondering if this was just DuPont's way of getting the information of Frank's whereabouts from Madani, possibly.
Yeah, no, I think that is also another big reason here, is to find the whereabouts of Frank Castle. But I also did take it that there was a jealousy moment, a green-eyed monster type thing that came from Dumont because of him talking about Madani, and she was, I think she says to him something along the lines of, you still have strong memories of your time with Madani, and then she's calling her in, and it doesn't only stay on Frank Castle. It talks about Billy Russo, so I think she's trying to get two things out of this meeting.
Yeah. And there's also that really quick reflex that you hear from Dumont when Dina's saying to her about Frank Castle, and she kind of goes, oh, Frank's so much worse than Billy. It's really this kind of moment where she has to defend her man if Madani is going to talk badly about him. And Madani doesn't take it at all. She's instantly going to go, what are you talking about? Billy's the guy that put a bullet in my head, effectively, He should never have come back from the injuries that were caused to him, But a really interesting scene. I really did enjoy it. But you're right, John. This is one of those ones that we're definitely going to have to wait till next episode to find out what the motivation behind Dumont was, whether it was that conversation with Billy or whether she was taking it off her own bat to get some information from Madani. So let's wait for next episode on it. And go on to our bullet point number 4. We spoke earlier on about the Pilgrim. We do see a little bit more of him. We talked about him saying that he didn't want to go back to his old friends. So our bullet point number 4 is the Pilgrim's past and present colliding.
Yes, again, I think something that I wish we had seen a little earlier in this season. I really like this, where he's putting the bounty out for the 5 million on Amy and Frank, and he heads to a few bars, and you get that moment where this kind of 20-year-old kid kind of picks up the phone and just says, I saw a goddamn ghost. And you're like going, wow, okay, so who is this? I mean, it seems like an ordinary kind of club/bar, nothing out of the ordinary, so to speak. But then, we have a great moment where he comes face to face with a guy called Cusack in the bar, just sat there in one of the booths and chatting. And we really learn more about the Pilgrim, or as he is called, Robbie. So used to be part of this gang and was out driving some of their stuff, whether it was drugs or weapons, and the alternator goes on the truck, and you get this nice moment where Robbie, the Pilgrim, talks about how that moment changed his life, but ultimately he went on the run and left this gang for 12 years or something. Yeah,
I think what they're saying is that he was supposed to be making a buy with $1 million. We hear from Cusack there's a million reasons that you should have come back here.
Yeah.
Quite literally is what he says to him. So it sounds like he's taken a lot of money, but when Pilgrim tries to explain this to Cusack, what he actually is saying is that he got into a bar fight, and because of the bar fight, they put him in prison, and while he was in there, he was born again, but he never used his phone call to call them or anything like that, and he's been gone away for 12 years. So he learned to save himself rather than going on the run, as Cusack seems to think. What actually has happened is he's changed his entire life and went to prison and came out a true believer. So a little bit different. And what I thought was interesting was the reaction from Cusack was, we thought you were a true believer in our cause. Every single one of us used to follow you like you were the leader of this gang. Even though he's not, it's not indicated that he was the leader. It's more he was the one that was giving them their style of how they should be, their brutality, their...
Yeah, he was the charismatic one. I think he talks about how he could always make a good speech to rouse the troops. Mm-hmm. And then there's Danny, the bartender, who Cusack says, you wouldn't have noticed him at all. He was just a teenager, but he worshipped you. He looked up to you, and then you left. And of course, I love the fact that, just giving the rousing speech to the soldiers, then Cusack rolls up his arms, and then you get to the confirmation of this gang, this far-right neo-Nazi gang, as he's got the German military cross tattooed on his forearm, along with a number, and you can imagine what other kind of tats that he's got across his body. But this is a really sort of difficult moment, because obviously then a load of heavies also come in to back up Cusack.
Yeah.
And Robbie is just there, left sort of grinning and smiling. But we do know that he took his weapon, his revolver, with him from the hotel room.
True.
So I have a feeling that things aren't necessarily going to play out too well for this group of people in the bar. But who knows? It could also be tables turned against the Pilgrim as well.
Yeah, I'm going to definitely continue to call him the Pilgrim, not Robbie. I don't think I'd be able to use that for the rest of the show about this character. And I'm so excited to see what happens with these. This is one of those ones where you're like, in any action movie, the bad guy is being surrounded by other bad guys. Well, that's going to end in violence, isn't it? So either we will just see the whole place just covered in body parts and blood next episode, or we'll actually see a fight out between all these guys here. But it's going to be really interesting to see next episode, definitely. And really interesting to see this. I'm fine with them leaving this part of the Pilgrim's past until this late in the series, episode 9, because I love the kind of mysterious character. But I just would have liked to see more of him in the show overall. I don't mind not getting the explanation as to who he is and his backstory until late in the show. And now I'm kind of hoping we're going to see maybe a flashback to him in future and see what he was like when he was in this gang. That might be interesting.
Yeah, that would be really cool.
We haven't had our flashback episode this season yet, so let's see when that one comes. Let's get on to our final bullet point, John.
Yes, bullet point 5. Frank tracks Billy and Amy. Yes, we mentioned that Frank has been tracking Billy. In fact, he turns a bit Batman-y here, I think, really. We have a moment where he's, as Derek had said, he's killed 3 people, and in the end he's had to go to the guy's phone to get the information because he's shot him dead.
With the most interesting way of opening up his phone.
Yes.
I'm glad the guy didn't have facial recognition. He'd have to carry his head around on his belt or something.
Well, yeah, exactly.
It was just thumb.
It was just his thumb. But he goes to this bar where he has identified this photo of a girl, and to begin with, I was like, how on earth did he know to go to that bar and to that pub? But her t-shirt in the picture has got the pub's name on it. Yeah. So he's gone there, he's found her, and he knows about Valhalla. He knows about this place. We've seen Curtis sending his vets to stake out Valhalla as well. We've seen the pretend homeless guy with the trolley taking the whiz. So yeah, again, it was really, really good. But Frank does go all Batman here. It's slightly disbelieving when he comes out of the pub. 5 men immediately kind of follow out, and then they lose him after he's turned a corner and he turns up behind them. So yeah, it was kind of like, that's just not possible.
That's our superhero moment for season 2 of
It really
Punisher.
is. It's like he turned into Mr. Invisible for a moment and just stayed still.
Maybe he has the ability to jump really high like Jessica Jones and we don't know about it.
Possibly. I mean, him being at the other end of the the alleyway and then him firing the guns, I would get that, or him standing his ground. But they come round. They obviously have seen him because they're literally about 5 meters behind him. They've seen him turn down there, and then they come round there and he's gone. And then all of a sudden he's behind. It's just really weird. It took me out of it a bit, but nonetheless, you get some more information here again after shooting first.
Absolutely, but we do get that great line from the guy kind of going, "Well, you're never going to beat us. There's 6," and then he just gets cut off by gunfire as 4 of his guys drop to the ground from Frank shooting them in the head, as usual. It's just a great little moment. But yes, Frank gets the information he needs to know, which is that he's got a bounty on his head. He has $5 million bounty on his head, and then he runs straight back to try and save Amy, just in case something's going on with her as well. If she did pop her head out, as John mentioned earlier on, somebody could have seen her and somebody could have found out who she was and gone after her. They all have the photograph shared among them of who Amy is, so she's in very real danger. But when he gets back and finds out that Amy's gone, she's gone, it turns out, to that friend Shan that she talked about earlier on in the season. It's interesting that Frank's warning to her when she said, the two of us can go and hide out in Shan's place, Frank's warning to her was, that girl's going to be dead. The minute you even think about going near her place, she's going to be dead. It's a slight flip on that. She's not dead. She actually turns on Amy because of the bounty that's on her head. The minute she tries to get new documents for Amy, and effectively she must have shared the photograph with the bad guys who were doing the documents, and the minute they see it's Amy, well, I think there's going to be some problems here.
I really like Frank's comment over the phone, which he says, "You're the most valuable thing that she's seen ever. So get out of there." And I really like that because, yes, Sean turns on her ultimately, and Amy really gets into trouble as these guys come after her to take her in and claim the bounty. But thankfully, Frank has given her some of this military training, which she does put to good use against one of the guys.
Yes. This is absolutely set up from earlier on in the season, as she's been practicing this move the whole season, as we've said. Finally shown here, where she takes the gun off him, turns the gun on him, and does exactly what Frank told her she has to do if ever she takes a gun off somebody. Always shoot him. You have to be prepared to do it. And she does it immediately as the guy's saying, "You're not going to use the gun." So, yes, we finally get Amy doing this, but she's completely shaken up until Frank comes in, killing everybody in his wake. Stands in front of her and she goes, "I killed that guy," and Frank goes, "No, you didn't," shoots him in the head and goes, "I killed him." So I did see someone call this the most heartwarming family moment in all of the MCU. I assume they're joking, but it is a good moment. It shows that Frank does care about Amy, I suppose, and that he's willing to put another bit of red in his ledger, as it's called in the MCU, another dead body, that he's willing to put it on his conscience rather than have it on Amy's conscience. So that, I suppose it is quite a nice moment there.
Yeah, it's lovely. Really touching, yes.
It's not.
I wish I had touching moments like that in my life.
Always double tap.
Yes, absolutely. If zombie apocalypse has taught us anything, ladies and gentlemen, double tap. Remember, double tap. Because otherwise that zombie comes back to life and bites you on the ankle, and then, hey presto, you're a zombie.
Exactly. But not some guy that's got a gun held on you.
But he may have had a smaller gun, you see, or a knife, or something like that. So, or one of those massive M4 machine guns, or something. He could, it could have been like a magician where he could pull things out of his trench coat. But ultimately, yes, double tap, even non-zombies.
Exactly. But we do have Amy kind of taking it back out on her former friend. I think their relationship is done with her and Shan, regardless of her apology saying, "Well, they made me do it." I presume she was going to get some money out of this as she was coming back into the building, Shan leading all of these guys. She was saying to them, "Remember who it was that brought it to you?" So she is lying to Amy here that they forced her to do it. They did tie her up on the couch while they took care of Amy and while they went looking for Amy. But I feel like Shan was actually involved in this. And the punishment she gets is a kick straight to the crotch. And a big smile from Frank after Amy's done it, because he's got to go, okay, this kid is definitely growing on me here,
And of course, it shows to Frank that non-lethal force is also a viable alternative.
He's never going to accept that, John. You even hear it in the next conversation that Amy has with him, where he's going, "But Frank, what if Billy kills you?" And Frank goes, No, hang on a second. I'm the one that kills people. Billy's not going to kill me. I'm the one that kills people. It's like, it's only when he messes up that other people die.
Yeah, exactly.
There's some serious overconfidence here from Frank. I
Big
have a feeling he may be going to regret that in a future episode.
Yes, I think so too. Yeah, definitely.
Any notes for this episode, John?
Just that Minden whiskey is obviously the whiskey of choice in The Punisher. We see it being used like a cheap bourbon in the caravan by Curtis Amy and Madani, and then it shows up in Madani's apartment as well. Now, whether she nicked that from the caravan, who knows? She could have been a sly field officer there.
Well, she wouldn't want to leave it for an underage girl to be drinking. You know, it's 21's is drinking age in the US, so Amy would possibly be reaching in and drinking the bourbon if Madani hadn't taken it. Weirdly, though, it also shows up in the club with Cusack and the Pilgrim sitting at the table, and Cusack is calling this top shelf whiskey. It's not cheap bourbon that it seemed to be when we were talking about it in the caravan. He calls it top shelf, better than the kind of stuff they used to drink back in the old days.
I tell you what, it is like 80 days around the world for this bottle of whiskey, or bourbon, I should say, for sure. But yeah, Minden whiskey, not real, but certainly there, popping up around New York in The Punisher.
I think that's it for notes on the episode and our bullet points. John, do you defend this episode of The Punisher? Season 2, Episode 9, Flustercluck.
I do defend this episode. I give it 3.5 par 3s out of 5. Yes, that's a nice drive for this episode for me. I really like the fact that we got the Schultzes and we got David Schultz and we got some backstory of the Pilgrim, aka Robbie. This is just really good, and I wish it had come earlier for me. But I'm glad we've had this exposition of these characters to some extent, and the mystery still remains there. I think, it was really nice delving into this new thing for The Punisher in those first 3 episodes. And then we've come to New York and they've kind of been lost, or they've been left behind in the countryside, really. And it was nice to see them make that scary trip to the big city and to really understand a bit more of these dynamics, That for me was great. And I think as well, the confrontation between Dina Madani and Billy Russo, who's crept into her apartment, just fantastic. The best thing here, those two actors are phenomenal in how they confront one another. This really did feel like the rutting season, with deers and the stags facing off here to do battle. And it was really nicely done by both of these. I thought Dr. Dumont, again, real weirdness to her here. And I think we just need to find out a bit more about why she brought Madani into her own safe zone and her apartment. For me, there's a few things a little unclear, but I'm increasingly it's more this crazy codependency that has been established between Billy and her. And then, with Amy and Curtis, again, that's feeding in to Frank's story. But I think for me, it was the Schultzes, the Pilgrim, and Russo and Madani here that made me defend this episode for sure. I thought they were really, really good elements to this episode. Derek, do you defend this episode of The Punisher, Flustercluck?
Yeah, absolutely defend this episode. They're right on track here for me for this show. Really good episode. Absolutely needed that moment with for things to slow down a little bit and get a little bit of history on the Schultzes, as you mentioned, John. Still not a fan of Punisher, but I think that's where they're going this season. I don't think they want him to be seen as a hero, so I'm going to watch the rest of the season with that on my mind, because all I've been thinking for the last couple of episodes is how am I supposed to even like this guy because of the things he does. There are some fun moments in here from the violence side where you have Frank taking off the finger of the guy to open up the phone so he can get his information, and then casually just showing it off at the bar that he's got this finger in his hand and then dunking it into the bar owner's drink as a tip, as he says. Fun little moments there. The gang that come upon Frank and say to him, there's 6 of us here. Oh, not anymore,
Yeah, exactly.
Fun little moments, I suppose, in the violence there this time. So this is kind of the level that I want to see the show playing at when they go to their violence sides. But yes, definitely defend this episode.
Excellent stuff. Well, with that, on to some feedback. We have some feedback on episode 9 that has come through from our Facebook group. Remember, you can head on over to facebook.com/groups/Defenders TV podcast, and you can leave any feedback or discussion points on any of the feedback spoiler posts that you want to on any of the episodes. Please head on over. But Kirsten Howe has provided some for episode 9. She goes, the guys following Frank out of the bar proved that acting and not monologuing is the way to diffuse the situation. Also, he proved that picking up a hitchhiker can actually have some real benefits. What is the point of Krista meeting with Madani? Is she completely insane? Maybe. Like she's proved so far, or is she finally coming back to Earth and doubting her recent romantic escapes? Having a girl-to-girl talk about their shared experience to really brighten your day, I suppose. Yeah. And finally, we begin the Pilgrim story after over half a season. Frank getting Amy out of trouble was fantastic. Amy's reaction to killing that man was very believable, and she used Flustercluck perfectly.
Nice.
Kristen finally says, I'm very much looking forward to seeing what Pilgrim does with the 30 guys surrounding him. I can't think this will end well for the masses. Thanks, Kristen, for that. Yeah, absolutely. I think with Krista Dumont, what is going on there? And I think we need to just see how that plays out in episode 10. Mm-hmm. But also, yeah, I think Amy's reaction to killing that man, you know, running through that kind of programmed movement to disarm him and then shooting him, I think it really was nicely done, actually. It's not something I've really pulled out of this episode, but I completely agree that she was very believable in terms of her reaction to what she had just done. Yeah. And I do feel that across this season, she's been really believable about her reaction to Frank's violence as well. So I think it's been really quite good to add that sort of bit of reality to actually what Frank does. And similarly to you, finally, we get the Pilgrim story, we get the Schultzes, we get some more meat on those bones for sure.
Yeah, definitely, really, really needed to have that throughout this episode and throughout this season. A little bit more, as you said yourself, Kristen, having that a little earlier in the season would have been nicer. Yeah, definitely looking forward to the next episode where we'll hopefully see a bit more of the Pilgrim and what he does to those guys all around him. Thanks so much for that feedback, Kristen. Really good to hear from you. We also got a little bit of feedback from Bob Phillips on episode 8. He says, so it wasn't a very long car chase, but we did get a good bit. And we did get to see a bit more of the tortured mind of a crumbling FBI agent and the skillful cleanup and police investigation of a murderous bank robbery. I was a bit right. And we added to this that the vigil and the rousing speech of King Billy to his disciples of doom, the Jigsaw army grows.
Yes.
Bob has also taken to calling Madani the agent who shields. I like it. That is a great nickname for Madani.
That is a really, really good nickname for sure. In fact, she would be perfect on probably a 16-plus Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.
Yeah, she'd be great. Anybody would be great on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. because it's such an awesome show coming back this summer. Bob also says about our podcast for episode 8, he said, great podcast again. Love the angst about the tipping points in here. Do we need shortcuts or are we relying on tropes? Is showing Frank going too far, being an uncontrolled baddie who needs someone else to rein him in, or is it making us unable to call him tough but fair? Is the Dr. Billy lead switching inconsistent or demonstrating codependencies? Really liking it. Thanks, Bob. Yeah, that's kind of where we are. It's because we're probably so far into the series at this stage, 8 episodes into the series, and we're not exactly sure what the showrunners are expecting us to feel about some of the characters here. We're not sure whether Billy's supposed to be the bad guy who is always bad even though he doesn't have the memory of being bad, or whether he should be feeling sorry for him. I've seen people with the reaction that they're feeling really sorry for Billy Russo. Well, he's the one that killed Frank's family, you know? He's the bad guy. He was the bad guy in season 1. He got his punishment and hasn't had to actually feel the punishment because he doesn't know what happened. So he just knows that he's been hurt. And in this episode, we hear that he still wants to go after Frank. So he's still the bad guy, right? So, but should we be feeling sorry for him? I'm not getting a Kingpin vibe from him still in episode 9. I'm not getting that vibe where I'm going, he had a difficult life and I feel a little bit sorry for how he grew up. For him to turn it on us, I'm still just feeling he doesn't remember. When he does remember, he's going to just turn back into that bad Billy. And I like the call out from Dina Madani in this episode saying, you still have all of that in you. You're still making the same decisions you would have made whether you had your memory or not.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really good between those two, for sure.
Brilliant. Yeah.
But yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot of, is it this way or is it that way that we need to kind of really begin to see. And certainly I think for me, Bob, you've pulled one, which is the Billy Russo and Dr. Dumont relationship. What is that? What is going on? As you say, is it this codependency, or is it something that is just not really being handled consistently by the writers here, maybe? I don't know. Again, it's those scars on her body. It would be good to get some idea. I think this episode was when I first saw the folded American flag on her fireplace. And I was just wondering, is that hers, or was it her husband's, or something like that? Did she have a husband?
Yeah.
So are those scars actually from being out in battle or something? And that's why she can connect with Billy Russo, because of that experience in battle, in war. So it's kind of something I think that will be pulled out a bit more, and I really hope so.
Yeah, and thanks again, Bob, for your feedback. Totally right, and very interesting ideas in here. Just one other thing that Kristen mentioned there in her feedback about having this conversation between Madani and Krista, and having Madani come over to Krista's apartment. Again, it's something that just popped into my head in this episode, in episode 9. After the visits that she was paying to Billy in hospital and her kidnapping him, we haven't actually seen her outside of her apartment at all. We mentioned it earlier on in the season, in like episode 4, episode 5, I think we mentioned that possibly she's agoraphobic, possibly that's the issue that she has, that she's dealing with. But at this stage, 9 episodes in, you would think she would have left her apartment at some stage, that she would have called Madani and said, I'll come out for a coffee and meet you, and we'll talk about this. Why is Madani coming to her apartment? Why is everything centered on Krista inside, indoors, or in her apartment? And why is she having this problem when she's looking out the window, that she's seeing the ground move away from her, like in Vertigo, something like that? That still hasn't been resolved, and they are definitely laying a trail here of her only being in her apartment for all of her scenes. Like, she's there all the time. We have Billy coming and going as he pleases, and she's always there when he wants to come back. It's not like she's got working hours from 9 to 5 at some other residence. She has people come and visit her to do their meetups with her, as we saw with Jake earlier on in the season, you know? So is there something bigger here that's happened since Billy kidnapped her and got out of the hospital with her? Which is quite interesting. Even though in this episode she talks about running away with Billy.
Yeah, I mean, I do. I just think there needs to be a little bit more here as well. And again, I think we might begin to get it. It really felt that this kind of took us out a bit of a lull, I think, that was beginning to happen within the series, and it, whether it was connecting with, as I say, the Schultz and the Pilgrim, which just, it felt fresh from the previous episodes. Yeah. So that was really, really nice. Or just having some really power performances here in the episode was really, really nice. But yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for all the feedback. Keep it coming. It's really good to hear from you. Remember that you can subscribe to the podcast at defenderstvpodcast.com. You can connect with us on any punishing or pacifist podcast catchers.
Nice.
Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, or Spotify. Remember, share the podcast and share the love.
Yes, fellow Defenders, thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next time with our episode 10 review of The Dark Hearts of Men, which is the next episode. Hopefully that'll be out on Friday. We're actually going to be away at that time, so we're really hopeful that we can get the episode out while we're away. It may just be a little bit later after that, but we will be recording it very soon. So make sure you stay subscribed to DefendersTVPodcast.com, and it will pop up as soon as we have it available. Thanks so much for listening. Talk to you again next time.
Yeah, as always, fellow Defenders, it is a pleasure speaking with you. I'm going to try and find a flustering bottle of Minden bourbon, and after I've found it, probably in Dina Madani's apartment, but I'll try not to sneak into it to get it. I will go straight to the door and ring the bell. And hopefully once the hangover has gone past, and yeah, we've managed to get back, we'll speak with you again shortly.
Bye.
Bye.
I hear a lot of people saying the blues, but I'm gonna tell you what the blues is. When you ain't got no money, you got the blues. When you ain't got no money.
This is Defenders TV Podcast, looking at The Punisher, Episode 9. What a Flustercluck.
You can't keep that up, John. You'll have to do it a different way.
This is Defenders TV Podcast, and this is Flustercluck.
Really? Yeah. Are we going to go that way?